Some films that are not that good still have some elements such as good acting, interesting dialogue, or unique stylistic choices that are still worth applauding. This film has none of those things, but it does have a big bird. The giant claw is practically exactly what you would expect from a giant monster film that only followed a couple of years after Godzilla. Like so many other films attempting to ride the wave of success left by the King of Monsters, it's just your regular generic cookie-cutter movie lacking any real sense of originality. However, to its credit, it does combine its generic giant monster movie tropes with generic B-grade sci-fi movie tropes. In fact, the giant claw does this to such a degree that if you were to cut out every single effects scene with the giant monster and replace it with an alien spaceship, I doubt the viewer, bar a few scenes, would even notice that it was supposed to be a giant monster movie and not some sort of alien invasion movie. We have the scientist who knows everything, although in the end he doesn't actually solve the problem, and that goes down to the main character. We have the general who is aggressively disagreeable, but in the end agrees with everything the main character does. We have the capable female scientist who is, surprise surprise, the only notable female in the entire movie, and we have the main character. And I think in truth, this main character, Mitch McCarthy, which is not the antivirus program, but actually apparently also a real last name, is the most obvious character insert a writer has ever performed. I don't like to throw around the term Mary Sue, especially because it gets thrown around far too much these days, but he is an engineer and fighter plane test pilot who we are quite literally told plays by his own rules.
But Mitch is an electronics engineer. He may work for the government, but man, he kind of makes his own rules.
Who also just so happens to be able to detect mathematical patterns considerably better than the mathematician in the film and solve complex metaphysical transdimensional issues better than the scientist who specializes and introduces the very issues in the film. The two military commanders in the film continuously berate him for being a civilian, but very quickly go on to agree with literally everything he says and calls him in as a specialist in situations where he really should have absolutely no say on. Oh, and also we're told that he's the only one that survives an encounter with the bird, not because he's a superior pilot, but just because the bird doesn't attack him. This is, for reasons never explained or even addressed, the writers obviously just hoped you wouldn't think about it. And perhaps the most annoying thing in this entire movie and his poorly written character is the way the romantic subplot in this film is written and develops. This is literally the entire development of their characters' interest in one another. They have, over the radio, one line of dialogue. He then crashes a plane they're in, they get into another plane, he kisses her while she's sleeping, he quotes a random line of Shakespeare, and she's smitten. Because apparently a guy you've just met who's 23 years older than you, kissing you while you're sleeping is not a horrendously creepy thing to do, but just rather charming. The fact that he's 50 years old and has looks that kinda remind me of Richard Nixon compared to her being 23 years old and literally played by a supermodel makes this entire relationship even weirder. This movie is about a giant interdimensional bird destroying the planet, and yet their relationship is literally the hardest thing to believe in the entire film. So that pretty much brings me to the end of ranting about his character. He's a ridiculously poorly written character insert and over-the-top Mary Sue and would seem even out of place in the most lazily written fanfictions. Also, that aside, he's creepy and really unlikable. But let's move on to the sci-fi part of this science fiction monster movie. The science part, which is the sci in sci-fi, is just too gosh darn much. Throughout the entirety of the film, there is almost 20 minutes straight of characters talking about science and the narrator talking about the characters talking about science. The film is only 70 minutes long. We don't need 20 of those 70 minutes to be characters standing around and talking science babble. Especially when at least 3 of those scenes are just talking about how the bird doesn't show up on radar. We're told at the very start of the film the bird doesn't show up on radar. We don't need to hear it discussed in detail several more times. These scenes just drag on like you wouldn't believe, and I legitimately almost fell asleep on several occasions. And what's worse is usually the only thing breaking up these scenes and sitting between them is scenes with a terrible romance developing. Occasionally, in the film's defense, you do get a break from the over-the-top science dialogue and the awful romantic subplot when we're shown instead scenes that are ripped off directly from better, more enjoyable monster films. Like this scene I'll charitably say is paying homage to, but is more than likely just directly ripping off a scene from Godzilla. Or this scene, which is once again just ripping off King Kong. But it is, in fact, in this scene that we find perhaps the film's only redeeming element, the actual giant monster that makes this film a giant monster movie. As I said at the start of this video, and as you can probably tell because you don't have to be a military expert to tell a bird when you see a bird,
there's some sort of bird, all right.
The monster in this film is a giant bird. And while aside from it, the film was utter garbage, I can honestly say I really quite enjoyed every scene with the giant bird. It looks super cheesy, is clearly on strings, and it is thoroughly enjoyable to watch it destroy buildings and see people run away in terror from it. As the element that was supposed to bring horror into this monster movie, this super goofy looking puppet is just utterly ludicrous. And I feel like they missed out on a real opportunity when, after seeing this creature come out of the props department, they didn't decide to turn the entire movie into an over-the-top comedy. It was prime real estate for a Godzilla parody rather than just another Godzilla knockoff. So there you have it, The Giant Claw. I wouldn't suggest you watch this movie, it's poorly written and it's mostly boring. But instead, if you could find a mashup with every single scene involving the giant bird wreaking havoc, I suggest you watch that because it would be fantastic. I mean, really, who doesn't want to see a giant, goofy-looking bird destroying military fighter jets? Thanks for watching, and until next time, I have been and still am Grindle.